The concept of looping through code is tied closely to automation and is a structure that can both save time and allow for more dynamic code implementation. This lesson will examine different looping structures within AS3 and provide some examples of times you may wish to implement them. So we can see this example file here, and right away we're declaring a private variable flash array and typing that to an array. One of the useful things about arrays, since they are index-based, they're very easy to loop through and automate. In our constructor function, we're calling two other functions. First one is build structures, which is going to build the array for us. And after that is done, we will process structures, which is going to go through and do our looping. So scrolling down to these two functions here, we can see that within build structures, we're setting flash array to a new array. And then where we could go through line by line and say new array.push and push specific values in. Here we're just feeding the different data values through a comma delimited list into our array upon construction. It's sort of like a shorthand way of building up an array structure. And you can see we're using basic Flash platform runtimes and tools and servers and so forth here. You can put whatever you want in. Going down to process structures, we're going to trace out basically a header that just says Adobe Flash. And then we're going to loop through each index in our array. And the way we're doing that is through a for loop here. So we declare for, and then within these parentheses, we set up a new variable. And this variable can be anything we want. Normally, though, if you're going over indexes, you're going to use I for your variable. We're going to data type this to an integer that is initially set to 0. So our for loop takes 3 different parameters, and these are all separated by semicolon. So after this first one, we use a semicolon, and then we have to put in a conditional. So as long as I is less than flasharray.length. So flasharray.length, length is a property of an array, which says how many indexes there are in the array. So in this case, there will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're starting out at 0, we're counting up to 5. So as long as there are still items within that array, this loop will continue looping through the items. So another semicolon, and then the last bit is what we do upon each loop. In this case, we're just going to increment our variable I. And here we use a operator ++. This operator is basically going to add 1 to whatever I is. So we'll start out at 0, loop will go by, it'll be 1, another loop, 2, 3, 4, until it gets to flasharray.length, at which point the loop will stop because all the conditions have been met. So all we're doing in here is just tracing out flash array and tracing a dynamic index. That index mapped to I, which is our variable for the loop. So the first time the loop executes, it's going to grab everything at position 0, and each subsequent loop is going to get 1, 2, 3, 4, and so forth. And we'll trace those out. So let's debug this and see how it works. Okay, and you see how fast that was. So basically it spit out Adobe Flash and then looped through every item within our array and spit them out subsequently here. So you can see how this might be very useful when you're looping over certain things, especially if you're looping over things to introspect values, compare values. So you can also use this in gaming. For instance, if you're doing some hit detection and trying to see if one object is overlapping another, basically the idea is you're going through the loop and then comparing different things. Of course, here we're not really comparing things, we're just spitting out data, which can also be useful inside enterprise applications, where you're bringing data back from a database and it need to represent it on the screen visually somehow. And there are actually a few other types of loops here. So there's the basic for loop, that we just went over. And there are also things like while loops. So in the case of a while loop, you would have to set up a variable beforehand and check to see that while some condition is true or not, execute a certain amount of code within the loop. So almost all of these loops are going to rely on some sort of check. You're going to look at different conditions and respond to them. So this has been a quick overview of looping within ActionScript using a common looping mechanism, the for loop.